afternoon on this Sunday, June 15th. I'm Nima Naufal. These are today's headlines. Maronite Patriarch Shaddai slams what he calls the negligence of lawmakers and their failure to carry out their constitutional tasks. Former UN and Arab League envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, says the unrest sweeping Iraq stems from the international community's negligence of the conflict in Syria. The Iraqi army claims to have slowed down the lightning advance of Sunni fighters by regaining some territory in counterattacks. Maronite Patriarch Shaddai slams what he calls the negligence of lawmakers and their failure to carry out their constitutional tasks. The people reject such carelessness, Shaddai said in a harshly worded sermon at Our Lady of Lebanon in Harissa. The people reject the MP's failure to elect a new president and the unstoppable violation of the Constitution and their dignities. He stressed that the Lebanese got tired of the policies that breach the democratic norms. He called on the concerned parties to reach common ground to resolve the ongoing presidential crisis. Lebanon has been plunged into a leadership vacuum after Michel Sleiman's presidential term ended on May 25th, with rival political blocs still divided over a new leader. Over the past 2 months, the parliament convened 5 times to try to elect a successor to Sleiman, but failed during the last 4 sessions due to a lack of quorum. Foreign Minister Gebran Bassil expresses relief over the security situation in Lebanon, urging political parties that are rivals to reach a settlement over the presidential crisis and end the deadlock. The presidential poll should be staged as soon as possible, he said in an interview with the pan-Arab daily Sharq al-Awsat. He warned of attempts to delay the parliamentary elections on the pretext of the failure to elect a new head of state. Justice Minister Ashraf Rifi over the weekend called on Lebanese officials to come together to mitigate the effects of the situation in Iraq, warning about the repercussions for the entire region, especially Lebanon. The Justice Minister spoke at the inauguration ceremony of the Miramar Resort and Hotel in northern Tripoli, now under the auspices of Tourism Minister Michel Faraon. Security is the course of duty of the state and the right of citizens, Faraon said along him at the ceremony. Miramar is located on the coastal Tripoli-Alamoun highway. Speaking about the Tripoli incidents, Rifi said that the will to live in Tripoli triumphs over death, and it has become a safe destination despite developments surrounding Lebanon. Former UN and Arab League envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, says the unrest sweeping Iraq stems from the international community's negligence of the conflict in Syria. Brahimi said that the international community's inaction on the conflict in Syria had precipitated the crisis in Iraq. The international community unfortunately neglected the Syrian problem and did not help to resolve it. This is the result, according to Brahimi, who resigned from his post as UN Arab League representative to Syria back in May. Meanwhile, Syrian government forces recaptured the strategic town of Kassab near the only border crossing with Turkey in northwestern province of Latakia. Kassab, an Armenian town, is strategically important because it is located near the only border crossing with Turkey in sensitive Ladiye province, the heartland of the Alawite sect from which Assad hails. The Iraqi army is claiming to have slowed down the lightning advance of Sunni fighters by regaining some territory in counterattacks, easing pressure on the Shia-led government in Baghdad. The gains by the Iraqi military come on a day when Iran pledged its support to the Iraqi government for beating back the fighters from the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant and associated armed groups. Washington also ordered one of its aircraft carriers to head to the Gulf in case President Barack Obama decided to intervene. The rebels' capture of major cities in the north and advances towards Baghdad in the last week have forced about 500,000 people to flee their homes and raised fears that Iraq could be torn apart. The army also reasserted control over the small town of Ishaki, southeast of Samarra, to secure a road that links the city to Baghdad and the cities of Tikrit and Mosul further north. The special representative of the United Nations Secretary General to Iraq visited a refugee camp housing families who have fled violence in Mosul. About 500,000 people have fled it, looking for safe haven after Sunni militants spilling over the border from Syria on Tuesday seized control of the northern city. Nikolai Mladinov, as he is known, met some of the displaced families and said that security threat posed by the militants must be dealt with through political and military means.
I think any use of force at this point needs to be very carefully calibrated, and I'm sure the Americans and the Iraqi government will make everything that is necessary to make sure that as the Iraqi authorities use force to resolve this crisis, that is done in a very, very calibrated manner. I think that is a message that is consistent with the realities on the ground. We're seeing a very serious threat to the sovereignty and the integrity of this country, and that threat needs to be dealt with. It cannot be dealt with only militarily, but it cannot be dealt with only politically, because your opponent is a very determined organization, group of people who seek to destroy the state. Continue working very closely with the government in Baghdad to make sure that the resources are here for the people to handle this displacement. However, all of our resources are very much stretched because of the Anbar crisis, because of the Syrian refugees. So we now believe there are overall about 1 million people in Iraq who have been displaced from their homes, and I'm sure that that is pretty much a conservative estimate.
Coming up next, U.S. President Barack Obama addresses the climate change issue in his speech at the University of California. Stay with us. Welcome back. A renegade Libyan general launched an offensive against Islamist militants in the eastern city of Benghazi in Libya, prompting dozens of families to flee the port in the latest bout of turmoil to hit the North African oil-producing nation. Libyan authorities are struggling to restore order across the vast desert nation ahead of a June 25th parliamentary election. The situation remains especially chaotic in Benghazi, Libya's second largest city and cradle of the NATO-backed uprising that toppled Muammar Gaddafi 3 years ago. Retired General Khalifa Haftar has declared war against militants in Benghazi, and several army units have joined him, though the Tripoli government says he has no authority to act. Residents were seen packing belongings into cars and heading out of the area to escape the current fighting in Libya. In other news, Pakistani military jets have carried out airstrikes in the northwestern tribal region bordering Afghanistan, killing dozens of rebel fighters. A military statement said that more than 50 terrorists, mostly Uzbek foreigners, were believed to have been killed in the strikes on terrorist hideouts in North Waziristan agency. 8 hideouts were targeted in the strikes. The army said that an ammunition dump was also destroyed in the raids. According to intelligence sources, the mastermind of the Karachi attack, Abu Abdurrahman al-Mani, has reportedly been killed in the early morning airstrikes. They come a week after a group of fighters attacked the airport in the port city in a 5-hour siege that left 36 people dead, including the 10 attackers. Colombians will vote in what is being described as the tightest presidential election in 2 decades. President Juan Manuel Santos, who has cast the election as a choice between peace and war, faces right-wing challenger Oscar Iván Zuluaga, a skeptic of talks in the second round of this year's elections. The candidates are locked in an unpredictable race that poll shows is too close to call and may have the narrowest margin for 20 years. Zuluaga won 29.3% of the first round of vote, while Santos got 25.7%. 3 other candidates were eliminated following the first round. In the United States, hundreds of demonstrators calling for tougher gun control laws marched across the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City. The demonstrators include relatives of some of those slain in the 2012 shooting rampage at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Some in the crowd held photos of loved ones killed by gun violence, cut down by a bullet, while others had signs calling Congress to enact tough laws. Most chanted "Not one more," the rallying cry by Richard Martinez, whose son Christopher was shot to death in the shootings at Isla Vista, California, near the campus of the University of California. Last month, this group is demanding action to be taken to limit the recent wave of mass shootings across the United States. The shooting at a high school in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, is the 74th school shooting since 20 children and 6 adults were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School. U.S. President Barack Obama addressed the climate change issue in his speech at the University of California, Irvine's graduation ceremony. With a feisty tone and a touch of aggravation, he laid into Republicans who questioned the science of climate change. Today's Congress, though, is full of folks who stubbornly and automatically reject the scientific evidence about climate change. They will tell you it is a hoax or a fad, Obama remarked. One member of Congress actually says the word is cooling. He urged the students to make climate change a prerequisite issue to determine whether a politician gets their vote.
As hundreds of scientists declared last month, that climate change is no longer a distant threat, but has moved firmly into the present. That's a quote. In some parts of the country, weather-related disasters like droughts and fires and storms and floods are going to get harsher, and they're going to get costlier. And that's why today I'm announcing a new $1 billion competitive fund to help communities prepare for the impacts of climate change and build more resilient infrastructure across the country. Today's Congress, though, is full of folks who stubbornly and automatically reject the scientific evidence about climate change. They will tell you it is a hoax or a fad. One member of Congress actually says the world is cooling. You've got to remind everyone who represents you at every level of government that doing something about climate change is a prerequisite for your vote. Hope is the belief against all evidence to the contrary that there are better days ahead and that together we can build up a middle class and reshape our immigration system and shield our children from gun violence and shelter future generations from the ravages of climate change.
Hola! Hola!
In the latest match for England, this was a strange kind of World Cup defeat. This time it will be a few recriminations, no grand inquest, little soul searching, no official or lay examination of what is rotten in their game. England played but lost, went for it but lost, had many of the best chances but also lost. They were beaten by Italy, not because Roy Hodgson was too cautious for the forwards inferior, but they lost because Italy played better yesterday. As well as winning 2-1, they hit a post in first half injury time and the bar in the same period of the second half. Most importantly, though, they had the best defenders. And on a night when tropical heat and humidity sapped the energy out of every man and woman in the Arena Amazonia, it was the real resilience and ability to hold what they had that won the game. More to come tonight. This marks the end of our bulletin. Now let me remind you of our top stories. Maronite Patriarch Shaddai slams what he calls the negligence of lawmakers and their failure to carry out constitutional tasks. Former UN and Arab League envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, says the unrest sweeping Iraq stems from the international community's negligence of the conflict in Syria. And the Iraqi army claims to have slowed down the lightning advance of Sunni fighters by regaining some territory in counterattacks. Those are your headlines that wrap up this weekend here on Future Television. Join us again tomorrow for what's making headlines here and around the world. Have a good week ahead.
محاولات لدفع البلاد إلى هاوية التدهور.
نهار الخميس كونوا الصبح بمراكزكم.